In this lesson, we'll learn how to use 3ds Max's Spline IK Solver. The Spline IK Solver really stands out from the other solvers that we have used because with it, we can cause the bones tied to that system to transform by the deformations of a spline. So this is very useful then for areas like a creature's vertebrae, a human spine. Could also use it for a tail rig that we'll take a look at in this lesson. Now before we get started, let's go ahead and take a look at the current rig we have. So notice we have this bone right in the center to control the pelvis and the other objects follow. Okay, so this is pretty basic. And each segment of the tail has been linked to its respective bone. Alright, so we can now start to see the result of the Spline IK. Okay, pretty basic stuff. Now I'd like to point out that the root of this tail we know is linked to our pelvis bone here. But what we'll want to do is actually take the root and make sure it is unlinked from that object. The reason why is when we go in and set up our spline system, it already has linking options so that we can link the rig back to this pelvis piece. But with the bone object being linked to the same, we might run into some twisting issues. So to avoid that, we just want to make sure that as of right now the tail is separate. It's not linked. Alright, great. Alright, so now the next thing we'll need to do is create a spline for our bone objects to follow. So let's move to our side view. From there, grabbing our layer manager, we'll go ahead and hide our horse temporarily, just so we can go in and start to set up this spline rig, and we can go ahead and bring all of that geometry back when we're finished. Alright, so under the Create panel, we'll go ahead and create a line shape. Let's go to our Snap tool. Let's go ahead and right-click to get to its options. We'll disable grid point snapping and enable pivot snapping so we can snap to each bone. Now, pressing the S key to enter into snap mode, we're going to go ahead and snap from our root down each bone all the way to the nub. Alright, great. So let's go ahead and right click to exit the tool. So here we have our spline. Let's go ahead and move back to our perspective view. I'll also press the S key to turn off snapping. What I'd like to do from here, just to make sure that the spline will follow with the rest of the rig, is to go ahead and take the spline and link it to the pelvis. Now, the next thing we could do, just to kind of clean up this shape, is to go ahead and reset its X-form and then collapse it down. It's always a good idea to do that if we're parenting geometry or a shape, to just go in and reset the X-form on it so we can avoid word skewing issues. Alright, so with it selected, again, after it has been linked, you can go to Utilities and reset the X-form on this object. Once it's done, we know that now we'll need to go ahead and collapse the object using the first type, modifier stack result, and that will convert it into an editable spline. Alright, great. So if we were to grab the pelvis, the spline will follow. Wonderful. We're now ready to create the Spline IK Solver. Let's go ahead and grab our root. We'll now head over to Animation, IK Solvers, and grab the Spline IK Solver, connect to the nub, and notice we have to pick one more item in that we know is the shape. So take a look. Notice Max has gone in and it has created a helper on each vertex position. So each of these helpers drives the vertex that it has been aligned to. Just to show you this, if we were to go in and start to move our helper around, notice the type of behavior we get. Now, if you're seeing a slightly different result, let's say you start to see the helpers underneath the current selection also move as you go ahead and start to move the selected helper around. Well, if that's the case, well, it's just a matter of tweaking the link settings, which we can access from our line. So with that selected, we can go to our Modify panel and let's take a look. You can see here are all of those helpers. If we were to go ahead and scroll down, here are our link types. So currently I have the second one chosen, and what that will do is it will cause all of the helpers to move independently except for the one at the very top. This root here will drive the entire tail, and I find this to be ideal because now we can go ahead and place the tail wherever we'd like it to be oriented initially, and then we can go in and start to animate the other helpers while avoiding counterkeying work where the other helpers would kind of follow, and then we'd have to kind of pull them down because we didn't want them to move as much. So this option gives us independent control. However, with it, we're not able to rotate at all. We're just driving the position of each vertex. So I'll go ahead and undo that back, and we could go ahead and take a look at our other options. So going back to the spline, the one at the top here, link all in hierarchy, is going to cause the tail to move in an FK way. So not only can we start to rotate and get FK results, but let's take a look. If we were to move these helpers, you can see that we still have the result of the Spline IK. So this is considered a Spline FK rig then. Alright, so really neat. The only thing is that if we wanted to avoid counterkeying, well, that's going to be impossible to do with FK, because as you start to rotate, notice how the other bone objects will follow, so you'd have to kind of rotate these back down, and it's really not a big deal in some cases. In some cases you want that type of control for some fast follow through, but in other cases we want independent control so that we can determine exactly where the tail should be posed, or how it should be posed, where it should be positioned. Alright, and then the last option, let's go back to our spline, just to take a look. This is going to unlink the entire system. So if we were to go to each helper, you could see that each is separate. The option that we will use is going to be the second choice, link all to root. So then what we could do is go ahead and take this root and link this to our pelvis. So when we go ahead and grab the pelvis and start to move this around, notice everything is going to follow. Let's go ahead and test this, bringing our geometry back just to make sure there's no weird twisting issues or anything like that. And notice everything works just fine, just as it should. Then we can still go in and start to move our helpers around. Notice the flexibility we get. Very exciting. So instantly, we have set up a control system for this tail. It's very animator friendly. If we need to, let's say, work on a gallop animation and we need to pose the tail, we can go ahead and start to rotate it up from here, and then we can start to animate the other helpers to have the tail flap in the wind. Very nice. Alright, so that's a look at the Spline IK system. Remember, if you decided to animate on these controls, you'd want to just go in, select each of the helpers here, right click, and freeze their transforms down. Now, something to keep in mind is that the IK goal is not to be transformed because it is driven another way. It's driven by the movement of each helper. Alright, so that's another difference. But I'd like to show you a few other really neat features that are tied to the Spline IK before we close this lesson. If we were to go to the motion panel, let's take a look here. Notice we have twisting control where we can go ahead and twist from the root of the tail, or if we want more of a twist distribution, we do so using the twist end angle. So we can go ahead and add some more twisting. Notice the flexibility here, really exciting. And we can still go ahead and pull the tail as we normally would be able to. Alright, so I wanted to go ahead and point those other options out to you because I think they'll be very useful when you start to get into animation and bringing this Spline IK system to life for creature animation. Alright, so that's a look at the Spline IK Solver in 3ds Max. Very useful when it comes to animating creatures that should move with a lot of flexibility.